Hello and welcome to Autistic FM. My name is Haje. I use he, him pronouns and I'm your host on this journey. You can subscribe to Autistic FM wherever you get your podcasts, and it would be really awesome if you did. This is how we grow and thrive. Over on our website at autistic.fm, you can find episode transcripts and additional information. We also have discussion threads for each individual episode, a neurospicy discussion forum, and much more. And all of that is completely free. If you become a supporter for as little as $5 a month, you can get a sneak preview of upcoming topics. You can submit questions to our guests, you can add topics to our future topics wish list, and you can access a supporters-only discussion group. We have a bunch of additional supporter treats coming up, so stay tuned. In this episode, I'm going to do something a little bit different. So, as regular listeners will have noticed, I am in the middle of going through a autism assessment. And the results just came through. I opened a document. I saw it was something like 37 pages long. And I realized I'm about to go have dinner. And I don't really know what this document is going to contain. I don't know why it's 37 pages long. And now's not the time. And so in this episode, what I really want to capture is some of the process that I went through for getting this diagnosis. I spent a lot of time looking around for a psychiatrist who would be willing to do this diagnostic process as a podcast episode. And in the end, that didn't really work out. I spoke to a couple of people who were a little hesitant to do it. I spoke to a couple of people who were like, oh, HIPAA stuff. I was like, I hear you, but also I'm the one putting out the podcast and I can say whatever the hell I want about my own medical stuff on my own podcast. But I think actually what they were trying to do was to protect myself from myself a little bit. At some point, I hope to get a psychiatrist back on the podcast to talk about this. But the company I ended up using was LB, and L2 was actually on the podcast episode a couple of episodes ago. And we had a wonderful conversation about what it takes to diagnose people with autism and how the way currently the diagnostic process is done is actually really clunky and frankly a little bit ableist. And so I decided to give them a whirl. I'm not sponsored to say this. They didn't give me any money and I paid the going rate. I didn't get a discount or anything for the service that they provided, which I feel really good about because I think it's actually important for you guys to know that I'm not influenced or sponsored by them, other than being pretty in alignment with their general mission. But I also wanted to capture a little bit here what the process was like. And basically what ended up happening is that I got a number of forms to fill in, and that creates the basis for this diagnostic process. I elected to go through a diagnostic process for both autism and ADHD, just because they're often so closely intertwined that, as far as I can tell, they're actually hard to tease apart. Like pure autism without ADHD, as far as I can tell, is actually relatively rare. And pure ADHD without other neurodivergent traits is also pretty rare. And so I was like, okay, let's get diagnosed for both and let's go through the process. What ended up happening was that I was meant to go through my calls before I moved house. I've been in this house for just about a month now. But what happened was that they sent a form to my sister and she filled in one form and not the other form, and then they chased her and she was traveling again. Anyway, so we had to actually move my calls with the psychiatrist, which I actually had a full-on meltdown about, because to me, autism is at this point very closely interlaced with identity. And like, I have a pretty polished persona that I use online, right? The way I talk, the way I write, like I'm clearly hyper-verbal, right? I've lost count how many books I've written, more than 20. I've written thousands of articles for publications you've probably heard of. I'm a very language-forward person. And for a long time, that was the thing that made me think, oh, it couldn't possibly be neurodivergence. But the thing that really clicked all of this into place for me is, if you are very good with words, that doesn't mean you're not autistic. autism is a spectrum. And the way to think about a spectrum in my mind is a slider that goes from -10 to +10, right? And it could be anywhere in between on that spectrum. For language, I'm probably a 9. I'm extremely verbal. I love languages. I love creating words. I love wordplay. I love puns. Like, language is my thing. And for other people, there may be people who are completely nonverbal. They might be a -9, but they are just as autistic as I am. And that goes for everything. It goes for sensory needs. It goes for sensitivities. It goes for everything. And for me, from time to time, that ability to use language actually shifts, right? I've had days where I'm editing a podcast episode where I'm interviewing someone and I'm like, oh God, I don't like, clearly my language center isn't fully online and I'm just here burbling along, like my brain isn't fully connected to my words. Anyway, all of that is to say, what am I saying? I don't know. I'm getting lost in this. I'm nervous. I'm noticing that I'm nervous recording this, but I want to do it anyway because I think it's important. I think the feedback I get on this podcast is often that we don't have to get into that actually. What I do want to talk a little bit about is the journey it took me to get here. So I think I have known in my heart of hearts that I'm autistic since I was about 13 or 14 years old. At some point, I read about Asperger's syndrome, and I can't even remember the context of how I found out about this thing. This was before I was really online much. I can't remember. But I do remember reading it and going, holy hell, this is me. This is describing me. This is, yes, the things I'm good at, but much more importantly, the things I'm like struggling with are described very closely in this. It's probably an article. And my memory of this is that I brought this to my mom and she was like, oh, you're fine. You have lots of friends. Everything's okay. And in that moment, I was like, oh, my mom knows me best. She's probably right. I guess it isn't that. And I put it aside for the next 20 years. And, you know, there's a lot of years between 13 years old and 33. Maybe I put it away for 25 years, actually. But throughout, there was a lot of moments in my life that were really hard for me. Big moments of change, like first going to university, first dating, first like figuring out how to be in a new place. And it's been very hard, especially when it comes to moments of conflicts and interpersonal pieces. Like I have a lot of work, like professional situations where I could not function. Like I could not figure out how to do something, especially when I was disagreeing with somebody and they were like, oh, it's fine. I was like, I guess if it's fine. But meanwhile, I was like, wait a minute, the thing you're about to do doesn't make sense. Or the thing you're about to do, there's a better way of doing this. That ended up getting me in a lot of conflict, where I, instead of confronting somebody about something that was being done the wrong way, I would just do it the right way, or what I thought was the right way. And it turns out in corporate land, you don't always have visibility of all the pieces. Like when you're senior, when the CEO of something, maybe you do, or when you're like a little bit further into your career, you are. But at the beginning of my career, I was often told to do stuff and I wouldn't understand why. And if I don't understand why, I'm really bad at doing the thing. I'm like, this is pointless. This is how I learn best, right? Like I could never figure out calculus until I started doing a lot of computer programming and made pixels move on screen. And I was like, oh, how do I calculate where the pixel need to go? Surely there's math for this. And sure enough, calculus. And as soon as I figured out that there was a use case for calculus, I learned calculus in an afternoon. Not all of calculus, I didn't fully understand everything, but like I had a real incentive to learn something and I was like, oh, I'm going to go learn the thing. And so that is true for me in almost anything. Like when I first wanted to learn photography, I was like, none of this makes sense. There's glass, there's lenses, there's apertures and ISOs, and I don't know how any of this works. And so I started reading about it until everything just like, I took the theoretical model for photography and was able to map it to the physical model of how a camera works and how optics works and how sensors or film works and all that kind of stuff. And now I've written something like 20 books about photography. Could I build a camera from scratch? No, but it didn't stop me from trying. And so I'm probably one of the world's foremost nerds about photography. And that's a typical arc for how I work, which is, of course, an incredibly neurodivergent way of being out in the world. But I often felt like I just really profoundly didn't fit in. And that has been with me my whole life. I have dozens of examples of where, in retrospect, I was having tisms, like very autistic moments of, oh, yeah, this makes sense, but only when seen through the lens of this is a burnout, or this is a meltdown, or this is sensory overwhelm, or this is like an inability to read body language, or this is like going down the diagnostic criteria for autism. It's a pretty interesting read, especially when seen through the eyes of a psychiatrist. Because the thing is, I know the diagnostic criteria for autism and ADHD almost by heart. I've read the DSM over there. I've read it often enough. And so as they were asking the questions, I was like mentally mapping it to, oh yeah, this maps to that, this maps to that, this makes sense. They're asking this question because that. And every question they asked made sense to me, not because I knew that they were going to ask it, but because it mapped to a diagnostic criteria. And I was like, oh, this is me doing the pattern matching thing, right? Again, how very autistic of me. And then a really big thing shifted for me during the pandemic. I caught COVID. And the COVID itself was pretty, like, I had the sniffles, basically. It was like, I've had colds worse than that. But it did something to my brain. And it really profoundly fucked me up. So it turns out that the way I mask is almost entirely on CPU power. Like, my memory isn't very good, but I can deduce things. Like, I have incredibly deep mechanical insights. I will know how to use any coffee machine, how to repair almost anything, because I see the parts. I'm like, oh, that part connects to that part, this does that, that notch is there because this is a safety feature that works over there, and the machine doesn't work because, oh, there's meant to be a part there, the part isn't there, or hey, that part isn't the right shape. That doesn't mean I'm able to repair everything, but I usually am able to figure out why something doesn't work. And without my processing power, with the brain fog that came with COVID, all of my ability to mask went away. My ability to deduce how to do something went away. And the way that showed up is that I went to a shop and I could not figure out how to buy stuff. I got nonverbal, so I lost my ability to speak. It was like as if I was on an alien planet. And it was incredibly scary. I was like, did I have a stroke? Is my brain broken? What is going on? And I just couldn't figure out how to function. For a solid 3 or 4 weeks there, I was broken, like really broken. And it was incredibly scary. Because it turns out I am a very intelligent human being. It's funny to me how Mensa uses a thing called Raven's advanced matrices to test IQ. Now, Raven's advanced matrices is basically pattern matching. 3 different shapes, and you're meant to, out of a selection of 4 or 6, pick the shape that fits in there. And to me, that was all just pattern matching. I was like, yeah, oh, this dot moves there, that dot moves there, okay, this one. And I scored ridiculously high. I can't remember exactly what my score is, but I am certifiably a genius. And I think that is actually not a result necessarily of how my brain works, but I think it's just training. Because my entire life I've been pattern matching and then using those patterns to figure out what to do next. And so when that ability went away, I was terrified. It's probably the most scared I've been in my life, because I was scared that was going to be the rest of my life. And I was like, how Like, people have brain fog all the time and get by perfectly fine. How am I this fantastically broken just because my brain doesn't quite work? And that was a long way around back to looking at, hey, what was the thing? What's going on with my brain? And that was around the time that, of course, a lot of other people are spending time on TikTok and social media and, hey, autism. And I picked it back up and I was like, okay, I was never evaluated for this as far as I know. But what if I took a closer look? And as I was reading the diagnostic criteria and as I was reading stories about what it was like to actually live with autism, I was like, oh, yeah, here we go. This is me. In hindsight, a lot of the things that didn't make sense to me about my own life, moments, stories, challenges, make sense when seen through the lens of neurodivergence. And pretty quickly, I became pretty comfortable with the self-diagnosis of autistic. I was like, you know what? It doesn't, like, for autism in particular, I was like, look, it doesn't really matter if you are professionally diagnosable or not. Because the point is, there's no drugs, there's not a lot of treatment. But if the tools and techniques that people that have autism, that are autistic, use, if they work for me, then it doesn't really matter. If somebody said to me, oh, you have a headache, take some vitamin C and it goes away, I take vitamin C and it goes away, it doesn't matter that vitamin C, in theory, doesn't do anything to headaches, right? Whether it's placebo or whether it's whatever, as long as the things I'm doing aren't harmful, but they are helping me, I'm totally willing to do that. And so that was my approach with autism. I was like, okay, everything I know about autism and being autistic kind of fits and matches me. And so, yeah, let's just roll with that. So I started getting a bigger clarity that my challenges were likely something to do with neurodivergence. And then I self-diagnosed as autistic. And in the course of doing a bunch of research about autism, ended up starting this podcast. Tell the story about that elsewhere. Listen to episode 1 if you're curious. But the interesting thing that I learned more and more about as I was exploring my own autistic traits was masking. Like the things I do to fake it to fit in, basically, and how that has kept me safe. How my masking has been a really good way for me to be in the world. And how my masking is actually stopping me from fully being myself. Like, for one thing, it's exhausting, but also the number of people who really know me, like who I am underneath the mask, underneath all of the thing. Like, I don't really know me, right? These masks run so deep, these patterns run so deep that occasionally I'm like, hey, why am I doing it this way? I don't like doing it this way. And then I'm suddenly coming to the realization that, hey, I don't know how I like to do something. Is this a mask? How do I like? And suddenly you're on this exploratory thing of discovering things about yourself that is completely different. And I was just bowled over by that journey. And I'm realizing that a lot of the performative part of my masking has been pretty harmful to me, pretty challenging, pretty, harmful all around. And so I've been trying to figure out, okay, how can I do this in a way that is in integrity with the me that I want to be? And this touches a lot of stuff, right? It touches emotional regulation. Like, how do I shut out the world, or how do I invite in the world? What is that pattern of overthinking that I've had for a long time, where I'm like replaying events again and again? And when I finally mentioned that to a therapist, they were like, that's like, most people don't do that. Or occasionally when I'm reading self-help books or like books about psychology or whatever, I read one book one time that was talking about, what's that book called? Oh, it was called The Untethered Soul, I think. It's a good book, worth a read. And the thing they were talking about was like that narrative that people have, like the constant narrative that is playing in your mind. And I was like, what? And I talked to a bunch of people around me, and they were like, yeah, I totally have that. There's a narrative, there's a story that's constantly, oh, there's a door, I'm going through the door, blah, blah, blah. that exists as language. And I was like, what in the hell are you talking about? And there's a few people around me who I know are pretty neurospicy, either autistic or ADHD or some other form of neuroqueer. They were like, yeah, sometimes, but not always. Or yeah, no, I don't recognize that at all. And so I started learning more about the various ways that my brain works and the ways that it is similar to people, but also the ways it's different. Delayed reaction, interoception, like knowing what I'm feeling, knowing what my body needs. All those pieces that I've found coping mechanisms for without really knowing what the underlying thing is. And it's been really interesting to, really refreshing actually, to explore all of that. Decision making causes huge distress in me. Like breaking up with somebody or doing a change in job or moving house. Like I have intense overwhelm and I'm scared. I'm completely dysregulated. I'm basically useless if I'm trying to make a big and important decision. But then once the decision is made, I have perfect clarity. I rarely look back and think, oh, this hard decision that I sat with, in retrospect, did I make the wrong decision? Like I'm able to move on and continue. And to me, it's a sense of, oh, that door is closed. I don't have to worry about that anymore. That option is gone. I recently started a new job and I'm about 2 weeks in. I'm really excited about it. It's very challenging, but it's also very fun. And this company that anybody who works in my industry will have heard of reached out to me and was like, hey, so we talked to you a while ago. We want to talk to you again now. We think we might have a role for you. And I took a deep breath and I was like, this company is incredibly prestigious. Like this would be a really good job for me. And I sat with it for the briefest of moments. I was like, no, actually it wouldn't. I've made my decision. I don't want to go through that loop again. And I'm happy with my decision. Like I'm not going to lose any sleep over what if there was an even better decision or what if. And so I didn't even take the interview. I was like, hey, thank you so much. I've just taken this other job. I'm not looking at the moment. And a part of me was like surprised by that. But I think it shows part of the growth that I've been on and the development I've had already. And then there's a bunch of other stuff that is true for me that I now recognize as part of neurodivergence, essentially. Monotropic attention is when you are like super mega focused on something and it's like borderline actively painful if somebody wants you to focus on something else. Absolutely true for me. Perfectionism was definitely true for me in the past. And I realized I was hurting myself, I was harming myself in pursuit of a ideal that essentially didn't exist and was just meaningless. And I was just harming myself in the process. And so for a while, I was like, what if good enough was good enough? And in many circumstances, what I realized was that my good enough is well above other people's standards in many cases. And that was really scary because I was always like, oh, if I just had, or if I just spent a little bit more, or if I just, right? But realizing in this life that good enough is good enough. I love something that is super over-engineered. Like I love something where they've made something essentially indestructible. But indestructibility in products is waste, right? Like making a very beautiful door hinge on a car that will open and close 10 million times is wonderful and it's a feat of engineering. But over the course of the life of that car, it's not going to open and close 10 million times. It's going to open and close 10,000 times, 30,000 times, whatever it is, right? And so there is a idea in engineering in making, like speccing it out. What is this meant to do? How many times are you meant to open and close this thing? Like a Ziploc bag, you open and close it 3 times. So if it's designed to be open and closed 20 times, it's well above what you need, and that's fine. Could somebody come along and make a Ziploc bag that is designed to open and close 3 times? Sure. Have they? Absolutely. If you use like a store-owned brand single Ziploc bag and it opens once and it tears, or if you bought like something cheap from somewhere and you open it and you can't get the bag open, it's frustrating, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's just designed to a different standard. And so my realization was like, hey, I am doing the equivalent of designing a car door that can be opened and closed 10 million times, but nobody's going to do that. What is the right level of spec for the piece of work I'm doing or for the thing I'm doing? And what I realized is that I am not bothered by a lot of things. Like, I have a bunch of stuff that I do where my standard is a lot lower than other people's standard. And I'm okay with that. If I'm the only person who needs to see it, deal with it, work with it, use it as a tool, then who gives a damn? Anyway, these are ways that autism shows up in my life. Living up to other people's expectations, like the combination of both rejection-sensitive dysphoria, so feeling pain when I have a perceived rejection from someone, and having some demand resistance. I don't really like it when people tell me what to do and how to do it. Like, I would much rather somebody say, hey, can you make sure the kitchen is clean? And then leave it to me to figure out how to do that and how to, like, what sponges to use, what cleaners to use, whatever. And the combination of those two things, so the rejection sensitivity and the real dislike of being told what to do, those two things often are very crunchy together. And that then gets amplified by the fact that I really struggle understanding social dynamics, or why somebody says something, or when I say something that I think is logically perfectly sound, that somebody else might get hurt. And so that stuff is all super tricky. Like, I particularly struggle in like medium-sized groups where, like, me one-on-one with someone, generally okay, because I can track what they're doing. Me 1 to 10,000, like if I'm on stage speaking, also no problem, because there's no expectation to track what everybody else is doing. Put me in a dinner party with 9 other people, and that's my personal hell, because I'm trying to track what everybody is doing, feeling, saying, what is underneath what they're trying to say, who's trying to get attention, who's trying to, like, who hasn't said something in this conversation, but I'm really curious about what they have to say, but then I have to interrupt and then hand attention to someone else. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to, in those kind of social settings, I can do it, but I get extremely tired after 30 minutes. And what I've figured out is that a lot of the time in social settings, I will just drink. If I am slightly buzzed or even pretty drunk, I just don't care as much. And so that is good because I feel better. I don't care so much about tracking people. But that also is a really big trap, because I might do or say something that really hurts someone and be completely oblivious. And then later find out, and then I'm horrified. So this is all the bits and pieces that kind of come together into this clump of, oh, I have gotten by for 42 years-ish, but I haven't been thriving. Like, these are really big issues about my life where I'm really struggling and never really found good solutions for. And I'm always trying to improve my tools and trying to improve my process to stuff. But it's been extraordinarily, excruciatingly painful. And I want to change that. I don't want to live like that. I don't want it to be like that. And so in the course of running this podcast, I have had a lot of really beautiful conversations. I think this episode will be episode 35, 6, 7, thereabouts. And in every previous conversation, I learned a lot from my guests. And I am getting a more and more nuanced picture of how diverse the neurodiverse landscape is, how much difference there is between what people are struggling with. I've had guests who feel like they're clones of me, and I have guests that I can almost not really empathize with at all, because their experience is so different from mine. They're so good at the stuff I'm bad at, and I'm so bad at the stuff they're good at, and whatever. So it becomes harder. But anyway, so I decided to get a formal diagnosis because, look, I'm running this podcast. It's called Autistic FM. I'm telling people I'm autistic. And I think self-diagnosis is 100% valid. But there's 2 pieces to it. One, I wanted to know what the process of getting diagnosed was like. Like, I want the first-hand experience of that. And I want somebody once and for all to tell me that I'm not crazy. That this isn't like me mapping a bunch of like idiosyncrasies to a diagnosable something. And so I decided to go ahead and go through the process, and the forms were frustrating. The first interview I did, so it was 2 interviews. The first one was about an hour and a quarter, and the second one was about 45 minutes, I think, all over Zoom. And in the first interview, my assessor, my psychiatrist, she was a little bit late, and that really didn't feel good. But she had a cold, and she was sniffling. And I have some degree of misophonia. Like, if I'm poorly resourced, hearing people's mouth noises, like chewing or sniffling, or it hurts. It actually legitimately hurts. A funny side note, my parents were always like, chew with your mouth closed. And I always thought that came from a place of politeness, which it probably does, right? But I'm also curious whether there's an element of misophonia at play there. Whether the actual sound of people chewing was, to some degree, it was not just a politeness thing, it was also a sensory thing for them. I haven't asked them, actually, I should. But yeah, so she was doing this interview, and every couple of breaths she was sniffling. And I was really distracted. For a solid chunk of that interview, I was seething. I was holding it together. I was like, why am I on this call? If this was with anybody else, I would have told them to reschedule. And if I can't hold a boundary with the psychiatrist who is diagnosing the thing that is currently bothering me, like misophonia, like sound sensitivity to other people's mouth noises, is definitely a part of the landscape that makes up autism. If I can't speak up now, when can I speak up? And then I never did. I never told her. I never mentioned it. I didn't put it in a feedback form. And part of me is, it's not my place to say something to somebody else about, like, they're sick. And another part of me is, Haje, you're allowed to advocate for yourself. Anyway, so that is something about the actual process itself that stood out to me. The assessment itself was actually a nice conversation. We just talked back and forth, and I was pretty nervous. Once it was done, I was like, oh, that was it? I've had a lot of therapy sessions where I felt like I had an insight or a breakthrough, or, oh, something makes sense now. And I really felt pretty let down by the assessment process. As far as I know, I've never been through a psychiatric evaluation before, so maybe that's just what they're like. But I felt really let down. And I don't know what I was expecting, to be honest with you. I don't know what I wish would have been different. But the process itself didn't feel like the catharsis I somehow thought it would be. Like, I thought it would be like a really good therapy session, but it wasn't. And a part of me has some imposter syndrome here. Like, I'm running this podcast. Hundreds, thousands of people are listening to me saying these words, and I'm becoming a voice to some degree for the autistic community. And I want to be clear, I don't speak for everybody. There's a huge part of the autistic community that hasn't been on the podcast yet. Like, I haven't had anybody nonverbal. Most of my interviewees and myself are what's referred to as level 1, which is relatively low support needs. And I think that's probably an effect of how I source my guests, right? I come across somebody who's interesting on TikTok, then I reach out and say, or on Instagram, or I get an invite, or somebody emails me or whatever. But for the people who live outside of that bubble, who wouldn't reach out or who are nonverbal, like, I would be delighted to have somebody who's nonverbal on a podcast, but I don't actually know how to do that. And I'm sure I can figure it out, and I want to figure it out at some point in the future. But for now, it hasn't been a priority. And so in the midst of all that, I have some imposter syndrome about, what if I'm not autistic enough? Like, even if I get a diagnosis, am I autistic enough to speak with a voice about autism? And I think the truth is, I'm not speaking for other autistic people. I'm speaking for me. And I'm talking to a lot of other people, which enriches how I talk about autism. But that doesn't mean I'm like a representative. Like, I'm just not. And so I'm really struggling with all of that. And so in the process of this diagnostic process, Like, I don't know what would have happened if she'd come back and actually you have some OCD-ish symptoms, but you're not autistic. I don't know if I would have known what to do with that. I had somebody on the podcast a few episodes ago that was talking about how she had become a spokesperson for bipolar disorder and was like a really outspoken bipolar advocate, and then got re-diagnosed as autistic and was like, actually, you're not bipolar, you're autistic. And that turned out to be a better diagnosis for her. But she had this moment of, oh God, what have I done? Like, I've been out here as a vocal advocate for bipolar pride, essentially, but I am not actually diagnosably bipolar. And so there's a little bit of that going on for me. And yeah, that imposter syndrome is running really deep. And as I'm saying that, I'm noticing I'm really nervous because I'm about to click through to my email and read this doctor's report and see if anything leaps out that I'm surprised by. So let's get into it. Let me open this report. I'm not going to share the actual report with you, and I'm not going to read it out loud, but I'm going to read it and record myself as I read it in case I notice things that are meaningful or surprising or whatnot. And I guess I also wanted a video recording of, if anything, I am diagnosed with. So I'm going to take a look at that. All right. So on that note, I am going to be reading these 35 pages while talking into a microphone. I don't know how much of this I'm actually going to include in the podcast, but let's crash into it and see what goes. So the first part of this report is all the fine print. It's the stuff that makes it clear that this isn't the beginning of a therapeutic relationship. It's a one-time assessment, kind of like a snapshot in time. They're not offering long-term care unless I seek it out separately. And this is more like getting a professional's opinion with some follow-up suggestions and not a commitment to therapy or treatment, which is great because that's actually what I was looking out for. I still think it's a really thoughtful evaluation. They make a point of saying that the conclusions are based on the information that I shared and that the clinician wasn't pressured or influenced in any way. While it's not ongoing care, it is a document I can use to advocate for myself and to explore what my next steps are. Next up, it's talking about the testing rationale. So why am I getting tested? Look, I went into this assessment already pretty confident that I'm autistic. It wasn't a shot in the dark. I've done the reading, I've reflected a lot, I've recognized traits in myself for years. And really what I think I felt I needed was a formal validation of this, right? As I've shared with you guys. Partially because I wanted accommodations to be more accessible to me, but also because the uncertainty itself was weighing me down. I feel like there's something powerful about being able to say, yes, this is real, especially when so much of the world is actually telling you that you're just imagining it. At the same time, I feel like I was pretty aware that getting a diagnosis might make some things more complicated. There's a lot of stigma. And let's be super honest, the political climate isn't always kind to people who don't feel it fit neatly into boxes. The current health minister in the US has something going on with autism, and if you ask me, has a couple of screws loose. And it's a little scary to be out there and making it public that I have an autism diagnosis. I definitely have some hesitation around that. But I think more than anything, I wanted clarity. I want to be understood, and I want to understand myself better, and to kind of stop second guessing the things that I think have always been true for me. If my car's broken and I think it's the water pump, but I don't really know, I'm going to take it to a mechanic and I'll say, hey, I think it's the water pump. Could you take a look? They'll take a look and they go, yeah, it was the water pump. But now a mechanic told me and I'm going to believe it's true. So I think there's a little bit of that going on. And ladies and gentlemen, maybe the water pump is broken. Then the next section here, they're going into some background and social context. 43 years old, identifies a man, he, him pronouns, identifies queer. It's interesting. It's also saying, as I said to the therapist, that labels are tricky and that I like to leave room for nuance. I actually think that's really nice that ended up in the report. I think that's reassuring. It's noted that I have a long history of working for myself and that I've built a career that is really fulfilling in many ways because it gives me a lot of autonomy. That I'm not constantly navigating office politics or rigid expectations. which honestly, reading this report back and seeing it black and white and thinking about what my career has actually been one of the ways that I've supported myself in choosing how I work, what my career has been. Like, I've jokingly said to anybody who will listen that I'm unemployable. And I don't think that's true, but what is true is that I am employable if somebody is willing to accept some of my quirks. And I think that's really important. It also talks about my education. It says I got a BA in international journalism, which I did. I didn't have any huge challenges there, nothing majorly dramatic in childhood or adolescence other than some bullying. And I think it's worth noting that doesn't mean I didn't have to work harder than others to make it look easy. I feel like the absence of red flags doesn't mean that everything was smooth sailing. It just means that I got really good at adapting to stuff. Then it's doing my social history. And this part is hard to read. Making friends was really hard, yeah. I was often the odd one out, for sure. Bullied a lot. And I cope by latching onto one friend at a time. Like, that person would become like much of my social world. And when interests shifted or circumstances changed, I'd move on and get a new best friend. And I never really had a group that I can remember. Like, I had intense one-to-one friendships that didn't always last. And it's actually really emotional to see that in black and white. It's hard to read. Like, I'm feeling myself judging myself for the way that this psychiatrist has accurately portrayed me on a piece of paper. Like, this is really hard to read. It's noting that as a grown-up, I've learned to be more socially capable, that it takes a lot of energy, that I have some different friend groups, and that the groups don't really overlap. And that it stresses me out when I think about introducing the different friend groups to each other. And that I spend a lot of time and energy keeping, I guess what we talked around a little bit is that I have different masks for different groups of friends. And it's very stressful to me to feel like the masks intersect. It's not that I'm like a completely different person with one group versus another, but there's definitely some differences. And I get really nervous when suddenly I have to adapt one mask that matches all the groups. Yeah. It talks a little bit about family history, that we live all over the world. Yeah. I guess there was a lot of talk about family and family history, and one of the things that the psychiatrist noted was that I don't seem particularly close to my family, which I think is probably true. Like, I don't talk to my sister or my parents all that often, and if I'm being super honest, like, unless I'm actively interacting with them, I forget they exist, which is such a horrible thing to say, but that's my truth. It's out of sight, out of mind. And I don't think it's apathy and it's not coldness. I love them. I care about them a great deal. But I feel like my brain has like an emotional bandwidth. And if they're physically elsewhere, which they are most of the time, right? Because they live all over the world, I don't know, they get tuned out. It's easy to lose track of them, even when it matters. And God, this is hard to read. It's not untrue, but it's very hard to read. Then it goes into the educational history here. It's talking about how in school, academically speaking, I got good grades. Yeah. I didn't have to repeat any years, completed a college degree. Yeah. Yeah, it also mentions that I procrastinated a lot and often got in my own way. I perform well under pressure, and I still do, to be honest. But it was usually because I left things to the last minute, not because I had a solid system. Yeah. Socially was hard. Yeah. Next, it's talking about employment history. In this section, it's basically talking about that I've had a lot of jobs. I think we concluded that I had about 10 jobs in the past decade, and then most of them didn't last more than 2 years. That I hadn't really been fired from any of the jobs, but that I also didn't find long-term stability. Yeah. It's interesting. I did this interview before I started my current job. And so I'm talking about being a pitch coach and how that's such a good fit for me. And that it enables me to get into problem solving and leaning into my curiosity. which is all true. Look, I'm not going to lie. It's really hard to see myself in black and white this clearly, and in black and white just spelled out like this. It's like somebody's held up an X-ray machine. And I'm noticing like little inconsistencies. I remember what we were talking about, but what's in the report isn't like exactly what I meant or exactly what I said. Like, I don't think anything major got missed or got lost in translation, but it's very jarring to have this very clinical description of a bunch of stuff where not everything is 100% accurate. And I don't really know what to do with this. I might email them and ask. I don't know if it matters. It doesn't matter that this report has little mistakes in it. Like, I feel like maybe I didn't express myself well enough. I'm realizing it's probably a pretty neurodivergent challenge to sit here and think about this. Anyway, it's bothering me. It's really bothering me that there are little mistakes and little quirks in here where I'm like, I remember that part of the conversation, and what is in the report isn't exactly what I said. Which I guess that leads me to, I don't know who the audience for this report is. I might never share it with anyone, and if so, this is fine, because I know what's correct and what isn't correct. But if this is meant to be, that's a little challenging. It's talking about my sensory stuff and mental health here, which is interesting. Lots of therapy over the years. Yes, that's true. Treatment for anxiety. Yeah. It's interesting, actually. I was diagnosed with ADHD once before and was put on non-stimulant ADHD meds to try and, like, there was a kind of a side quest here where I felt like my brain fog was really bad. And in the bad brain fog, I used this other service that diagnosed me with ADHD and puts me on non-stimulant meds. But the way that this diagnosis went, there was a while in California where you could get a medical marijuana card. So medical marijuana was legal, but recreational marijuana was illegal. And the process of getting a medical marijuana card was you get on the phone with this doctor and they go, do you ever have problems sleeping? Yes. Are you sometimes nervous? Yes. Do you feel like sometimes you have low or too high appetite? Yes. Okay, great. I think you're a great fit. Here's your medical marijuana card. It felt like that, but for ADHD. And they put me on non-stimulant medication, and honestly, it didn't work for me. I got very nauseous, and I took it for maybe 3 or 4 days, and I just couldn't take it. And I actually have a problem with that service in general. I might do a separate podcast episode about that, because I think they are borderline unethical in how they run their business. But seeing that show up in this report is a good reminder of, I've been at this. I've been looking for what is up with me for a while. It says I'm noticing patterns for sensory overload. That's true. Loud sounds, too many people talking. Yeah. Complex textures in food. Yeah. Stimming, fidgeting, cracking my knuckles. It was so funny. The psychiatrist was like, do you stim? And I was literally holding my Apple AirPod case and flicking it open and closing, running my thumb around along the sharp ridge. And I was like, yeah, actually right now. So that was funny. Anyway, it's interesting. There's like responses from a third party section here, which says that I authorized a third party to provide feedback. I did. It was my sister. But there's nothing in particular here about what she said. And maybe that's okay. But it doesn't say anything about whether my sister's responses are in conflict with or support. It's a little weird how this is done. I like that they talk to somebody else. It's worth noting that the option was there. And I think it speaks to how thorough the process is. They're not just taking my words for it. They're triangulating the data. But it's interesting how they didn't really bring that data in. Maybe it's just supplementary data, but yeah, that's interesting. Next up, there's a whole section that talks about the DSM-5 criteria for autism. It's a diagnostic framework. It breaks down autism into a few categories: social communication challenges, repetitive behavior, sensory sensitivity, how early in life symptoms showed up. And you have to meet a certain number of those criteria to qualify for a DSM-5 diagnosis of autism, which is interesting, right? The DSM is the the manual that people are using. But it's also very disordering. The thing I always say is that it feels like the DSM isn't about what your experience is, it's how annoying you are to others. And so it's interesting how even in this framework of doing this work, they, in order to be able to be a valid diagnosis, because this is the manual, they have to use it. It feels clunky. It's interesting how rigid and how clinical this section feels compared to the richness and the lived experience of the rest of the report. It's a checklist, and behind everything in a checklist, just like a lifetime of moments where I felt off or confused or out of sync with the world around me. And I understand that this is the lens that clinicians need to use to understand autism. I understand why they do this, and it feels very uncomfortable to me. It's like they're trying to shoehorn me into a framework that kind of everybody agrees isn't the right framework. But I get it. That's how a diagnostic process works. For the review and actual evaluation, so this is section 11, they're using a tool that they call the Autism Spectrum Quotient, which is a standardized questionnaire for adults, which gives a score between 0 and 50. And anything above 25 is in the you might be autistic range. And so this page is actually pretty straightforward. Scale from 0 to 50. Anything over 26 might be autistic, and I scored 41, which is pretty high. They also note that most non-autistic males score 17 on average. So I think, as they would say in Oakland, hella autistic. So yeah, that's really interesting. Next, after that, they go on to a social and occupational adult autism assessment. And this part is actually really interesting because this is where the deep dive begins. It looks like they're looking at how I show up in the world, socially, emotionally, my behavior. They asked a lot about how I start conversations, how I interpret facial expressions, fidgeting, stimming, how I relate to routines and sensory input, whether I mask or whether I perform in social settings. Spoiler alert, I check a lot of these boxes. What I really like about this is that there's a whole section here on feminine high masking traits, the kind of behaviors that are often overlooked in traditional assessments. Things like preparing social scripts, hiding discomfort, mimicking other people's facial expressions, needing to decompress after having had a big day in order to try to pretend to be normal. And I've got to say, I related to a lot of these things. Like, it is really validating to see this part of my neurodivergent profile being reflected back to me like this. I think it's really wonderful. And then finally, they do a summary of my autism diagnosis. And this is the official diagnosis. And my official diagnosis is autism spectrum disorder level 1, which they describe as I don't need daily support with basic functioning, but I do need support in key areas like sensory regulation, communication, executive functioning. And the report emphasizes that while I've built a successful life, I've done it by masking, pushing through discomfort, and expending a lot more effort than people around me likely realize. And what's really wild is reading how clearly the report just lays it out. Yeah, you're doing the thing, but it's not sustainable without accommodations and understanding. And the recommendation here includes occupational therapy for stress and anxiety, yep, support groups, and even just being more open about needing accommodations. And I think what I'm reading here is that, look, I've been white knuckling it, and I don't have to keep doing that alone. And it's really emotional to read this. It's really emotional to read this. ADHD level 1. Like, I'm not surprised. But I think this is my hall pass to go and seek out some accommodations and to, you know what this is? This is my hall pass to really advocate for the things I need in order to thrive, and to realize that the world isn't really built for me, and that I have built the padding that I need around me in order to in order to be. And that's okay. Like I now have a piece of paper or a stack of electrons. I have a piece of paper that says, yeah, I need to be careful. I need to look after myself in ways that is different from most people. Yeah. Jesus. So I'm noticing a lot of emotions right now, and I don't really know what they are. But I think it actually feels really good to have these recommendations, to have occupational therapy for sensory processing. It's never occurred to me to get occupational therapy. And it actually reminds me of one of the episodes of this podcast where I talked to an occupational therapist who actually, a lot of stuff they said was like, oh, can I be your client? And I was joking, I think. But this is good. Psychiatric intervention for comorbid mental health diagnoses. Yeah, I think it's actually worth me doing a deeper dive and seeing, hey, what is my mental health landscape and where do I need support? What are the things other people do in order to do this? Therapy for stress and anxiety. Yeah, that was really what drove me to therapy in the first place. And I think continuing that is going to be really helpful. Group interventions. Let's see if I end up doing that. And yeah. And follow up with physicians for medical comorbidities. I think it's worth me doing some research. I got a new job. I finally got rid of Kaiser. Kaiser is great, mostly because it's very similar to the NHS in England. The hospitals are the pharmacies, are the doctors, are the insurers. Everything is rolled into one ball. And so conceptually, I found it easier to deal with. But from a mental health point of view, Kaiser has been absolutely pathetic. And I think because I am now learning about myself that my mental health, my autism, is an important part of the picture for my health, I'm going to start looking into that more. So I think this page, it's only 3 paragraphs. This page is going to be very helpful in helping me map out what to do next and how to think about this properly. We're only at page 18, guys. Halfway. Next up, DSM-5 criteria for ADHD. So this section shifts into ADHD and it's presented as a checklist. Split between inattention and hyperactivity and impulsivity. So this is again the DSM-5 criteria. You need to hit at least 5 symptoms in each category for a combined diagnosis. It looks at when the symptoms first appeared, in my case, pretty early, and how they show up in multiple parts of your life, school, work, relationships. It's actually jarring to see how much overlap there is between ADHD and autism when you read the criteria side by side. But they do manifest differently, right? And so this section is really about naming the ADHD piece of the puzzle. And because I've struggled with focus and motivation and follow through, like I don't think I've always connected that to something formally recognizable. And the context that I had for seeking an ADHD diagnosis a few years ago was around brain fog. And so really that was me dealing with my long COVID, I think. And the non-stimulant medication just made me really sick. So I don't think I stayed on it for long enough to really figure out whether or not it made any difference, to be super honest. Next up is the formal ADHD screener, a structured interview that checks whether I meet the criteria in childhood and adulthood. And the answer is a very clear yes. It looks like I met all 9 inattention symptoms and 7 out of 9 for hyperactivity and impulsivity. The patterns weren't new, right? I've been living with this since I was a kid. And the interesting thing is I think some of these diagnostic processes are actually camouflaged by the successes and the coping strategies I created to deal with them, right? Like I have a lot of systems, I have a lot of processes, I have a lot of like ways I like to do things. And a lot of the ADHD symptoms here tie directly into the things that I've struggled with that I've never really talked to people about, like zoning out in conversation, like putting things off, even when I care about them a lot, like losing things all the time, Like that one I actually built a really good system for, so I rarely lose things anymore. But for the longest time, I was like, the number of wallets and keys, the number of driving licenses I've had to have replaced, it's a miracle that I think I just got better at building systems around myself. Feeling like I was powered by a motor until I crash. Yeah. Yeah, this is not a borderline case at all. It's a clear match for ADHD. And it's interesting. This is helping me reframe a lot of moments from my past with more compassion, but I'm now going to have to spend some time unpicking which parts of these challenges are the ADHD and which parts are autism. The next session is about a late social and occupational ADHD assessment. And it's really hard to read. This is really hard to read. Like, it's reflecting back to me all the things that I said. Like, it walks through dozens of examples, like forgetting self-care routines, feeling paralyzed before starting tasks, being great under pressure but terrible with routine, which is so challenging because the autistic side of me craves that routine. Making big emotional investments in people and then seeing them drift away. Yeah. God, this really feels, this is my secret diary that I didn't realize I wrote in this conversation with this therapist. It's actually really spooky to read this. And although the ADHD is actually a bigger surprise, it bothers me less. Like this one, I want to talk to my therapist about that. There's something interesting about like why that didn't. It's interesting. It explores how ADHD shows up in executive dysfunctions, the ability to plan, prioritize, and follow through. I've always thought of myself as somebody who gets things done. But the truth is, if I stop, like I often will, like if I take a break, like restarting a task that I was doing before is very hard for me. Like I will often start something at 8 p.m. and then work at it until 4 in the morning because that's the only way I keep my inertia up to get it done, to really get the work done or to get the thing done. And in those moments, I forget to eat, I forget to drink, I forget to, yeah. Oof. Yeah, seeing this pattern laid out, it's so brutal, but also really validating. It's fascinating. And the final summary here confirms that I meet the criteria for ADHD, combined presentation, which means both inattention and hyperactivity are present. The severity is listed as mild, but that's not really about the impact. It means that I don't have symptoms beyond what's needed for the diagnosis. And even the report here says it very clearly. The condition interferes with my daily life and makes things harder than they need to be, which I'm going to have to sit with and try and unpick a little bit. Maybe it's time to have a chat with a doctor about medication or other. I feel like anyway, I'm just talking into a microphone right now. I need to actually sit with this rather than everything else. But I also wanted to just do this live. The recommendations here are pretty similar to the autism section. So therapy, support groups, psychiatric support for co-occurring issues like anxiety and depression. Yeah. The real takeaway for me here is I'm not lazy. I'm not broken. I'm not making excuses. I've been operating on hard mode without even really realizing it. And maybe now that I know, I can give myself a little bit more grace. Oof. Yeah, this is a lot. I do love how they phrase this. Haje is a pleasant and cooperative 45-year-old, 43-year-old? Am I 43? Haje is a pleasant and cooperative 43-year-old individual with a significant history of inattention, distractibility, and executive dysfunction that cause discomfort and interfere with his day-to-day choices. Yep, that's me. That's me. Oof. And that's it. 35 pages of report. So, how in the world do I wrap something like this up? I'm a little surprised by the ADHD. Like I thought maybe it would be, no, this diagnosis is super clear. It's mild, but like I fulfill almost all of the ADHD criteria, which, yeah. I'm feeling a lot of emotions right now, and I don't really know what they are. I'm noticing one strand, which is grief for little me, who deserved to know why I was different. I'm noticing sadness and frustration for, I really feel like my life has been a lot harder than it really needed to be. I'm sensing some bitterness there. And I'm also sensing some acceptance, I think, of, yeah, but that was the past. Like I don't have a time machine. I can't go back. I can't do anything differently. And I think really this is an invitation for me to look at what my future might hold. What am I going to do differently? What am I going to do to avoid burnout? How do I take care of myself in terms of what my body needs, what my mind needs, how to stay interested and focused? How can I pursue hobbies in a way that is in alignment with how my brain works? How can I thrive at work? Like the first couple of weeks in this job have been lots of highs and some crushing lows where I'm like, what have I done? What am I doing? I'm scared. I'm scared. I think fear is what I'm feeling, and it's confusing me. I'm not feeling the catharsis. I'm not feeling relief. I'm not feeling, oh, it all makes sense now. There's some really, I'm feeling disappointed. I'm feeling disappointed because I somehow thought that having this diagnosis would change something. And honestly, it feels like it didn't really. I think I understand, like the things I understand about myself, I already understood about myself. This is the same brain, same struggles, same strengths. And I've built a really beautiful life for myself with some really wonderful people in it. Like I've done stuff, I've accomplished things. And I think I get to give myself the grace to enjoy that. And I don't know how. The other thing I've been doing in parallel actually is I have spent a lot of time with ChatGPT and talking back and forth. And basically, I asked it to ask me about every single symptom and every single challenge and every single comorbidity that exists around autism. And I'm going to have to do the same with ADHD because that part I hadn't done yet. And just talk through them. At first, it gave me a list of 30 things. I was like, no, ask me one at a time. And if it's like something that's surprising, let's talk about it more later. And we've gone back and forth, hundreds, if not thousands of messages. That has actually been more meaningful than this diagnosis. I look forward to telling ChatGPT about. I might just upload this PDF actually and go, hey, look, this is what the doctor said. No, I really thought that this would feel like a new chapter, but it doesn't, or at least not immediately. It doesn't even really feel like major punctuation. It's not an exclamation mark or a full stop. This feels like a comma. This is okay. We know this now, but the journey continues. The work of gnosis, of self-understanding continues. And maybe it's helpful to have a label. Autism is a very fuzzy label, right? It's like I'm sitting here in my new studio, my beautiful new studio that I love, with two very bright lights that don't bother me at all. They're video lights. They are like helping me look good on camera. They don't bother me in the slightest. And I think it's because I know why they're there. I put them there. I don't love them. And as soon as this call is over, I will do, hey Siri, work mode. I'll show you what happens. Yeah. This is how I usually work. Like all the lights around me are dimmed to a much more sensible level. And when I'm doing work on a computer, this is how I would do that. And this just feels much better. Hey Siri, video call. But when I'm on video, I like to look good. And so I have the camera, I have the lights and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, what I'm saying is there are pieces of my sensory landscape that bother me a lot less or a lot more. And I think I'm actually just going to let myself have that and learn more about how I give myself accommodations and call in a team. The people who are closest to me, right now, I don't even really know what to ask them. But I think it would be prudent of me to loop them in and be like, hey, like the people I work with, my closest friends, the people I spend a lot of time with, and figure out what is it that I need to ask for in order to make my existence more tolerable. And so that's going to be my next piece of homework. And so what did I learn? I don't know what I learned. I think I will be coming back to this in future episodes. But I think what I want to say for now is that I think it was important for me to get a diagnosis. And self-diagnosis is 100% valid. The interesting piece of the puzzle here is the ADHD. There are medicines for ADHD that, from what I'm hearing, are extremely helpful to people. And maybe that's my next step, to figure out, okay, how, like, are those medicines helpful for me? Can I have a significant improvement in quality of life through pharmaceutical help? Or are there diet changes I can make? Or what can I do? Because I'm motivated to do it. I feel like I would like to play life not at extremely hard mode, merely at pretty hard is plenty. Thanks. I'm a little disappointed in this podcast episode, if I'm being honest with you. I'm like noticing that I'm hesitating whether or not I even want to put this out. I didn't really have any insights or whatnot. Hopefully it's helpful. Hopefully it gives a glimpse into what the process was like. I appreciate that my process is going to be different from other people's process. But yeah, it feels like a really vulnerable piece of podcasting, and I'm not even really sure why, because I feel like everything I've discussed here is like, there's not a lot new here. If you listen to all the other episodes, I don't think there's anything in this that will be surprising to you. But yeah, well, it feels weird to, so normally I record the outro and intro script separately, and so I have a very different energy, but today that's going to be different. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening to this, and if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow us. I'm on TikTok on Autistic FM. I'm on Instagram at autistic_FM, and you can find us online on autistic.fm. You can subscribe for free. You can join in the discussions for each episode. You can suggest future guests and get involved. Join us. This podcast is hosted and produced by me, Haje Kamps, and it is wonderfully edited by Sean Portillo. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I'm honored that you're curious enough to sit through however long this... God, I've recorded for 2 hours. Hopefully I'll edit some of this out, because 2 hours, nobody wants to listen to this for 2 hours. But yeah, catch you soon.